Good afternoon, Suidlanders. How are you? We hope that you're well. Why does it seem to me that the sound is odd? I don't have a monitor, so I'm not hearing the sound that you're hearing, but it seems to me that the acoustics in the room are different. I hope that they aren't strange on the other end and that I'm just worrying for nothing. If you can hear a whirring sound in the background, it is my big high-speed fan, which usually, because it's so powerful, sits around the corner of this office and blows in, and it's not all that audible. But I've had to put it in the door because I have gone off grid with my little solar system. So I can't use the air conditioners the way that I used to do, running 24 hours a day, every day some days. Anyway, Suidlanders, welcome to the Week in Review. Let's get cracking. As you know, we begin on Saturdays because we produce this video and upload it on Fridays. So, what do we know about last Saturday that was of any interest? A video emerged describing why South Africa is headed for civil war. It's a scenario thing. Following the fraudulent elections of 2024 and a subsequent sudden total collapse of the electricity grid. I told people that as far as I was concerned, this is something very much akin to what K.W. Miller has been doing. It was, I should perhaps mention, it was like a cartoon pastiche. So they used different mediums and they kind of blended them into one another. And it was, as I say, a scenario sketch. Where was I? Anyway, I said it's very much akin to K.W. Miller. This thing is intended to cause trouble, and it has been produced with three things especially in mind. Somebody had the money to do it. Somebody felt the need to stir the pot, and somebody felt the need to stir the pot now. Please excuse my new Malinois dog that I got from Louis Hutton. She is a handful. She's 7 weeks and 5 days old, and she's already getting the better of me. Outside. Not you, Pebbles. Pebbles, you can stay. Pebbles is dying, so sorry about this, everybody. Right, let's continue. On Sunday, the 19th of February, there was lots of talk of floods. I beg your pardon, everybody. That's life in the Roche household and workplace at the moment. A lot of talk of floods. Some very serious channels on YouTube, including Yours Malan, who does a very good job, began to talk of floods in the north and west and central regions of South Africa. In other words, coming from the rivers that feed the Vaal and that feed into the Vaal Dam, Bloemhof, to the confluence between the Vaal and Oranje rivers at Douglas, and down towards Uppington. Now, of course, many sluice gates were opened. We saw all of that. Huge amounts of water being released from the Vaal Dam and from the Bloemhof Dam. We saw that the rivers did indeed rise drastically, but it hasn't turned out to be a crisis yet. There is the threat of Cyclone Freddy. We'll talk about it in a minute's time. But so far, so good. It hasn't become a total disaster. Now, needless to say, if you live in Parijs and you're watching this video, that's not the way that you see it. Schweizer-Reneke, that won't be the way that you see it. You'll be quite unhappy with me saying that it hasn't become a crisis if your house is flooded. But it certainly hasn't become the national or quasi-national crisis that it seemed that it may be, when at a point in time they were talking about the Vaal and the Orange rivers bursting their banks in many places and with the most severe of consequences. We learned on Sunday the 19th of February that Donald Trump Donald Trump Jr., I beg your pardon, Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., alleged that the train derailments in the USA were the work of Russia in retaliation for Nord Stream 1 and 2. I'm just going to shift my video material here. And I tell you what, it's a very fascinating proposition. By no means is Suidlanders saying that we believe that it is the case, but we are fascinated by the possibility that Russia could now be retaliating in ways that the USA is not fully aware of, by instruments that were laid or set in place possibly in Soviet times. Do you remember all the rumors that the Russians had possibly smuggled a nuclear bomb into the USA and placed it in situ to be detonated at a later date? Who knows whether those things are true, but doubtless, absolutely doubtless, the Soviets and subsequently the Russians did and have figured out ways to cause harm to the USA in the event of a cold or a hot or a proxy war between the two of them. Now, of course, we're seeing some combination of a cold war and a proxy war. We haven't heard very much of the Russo-Sino South Africa naval exercises off the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal that began on the 17th, Friday the 17th, last Friday of February, and which will end on the 27th, today being the 24th, if you didn't know it already, so to end on Monday. But they're probably more or less done and dusted. The 27th will probably be a last day in South Africa, heading out on their way home. The 26th will be a refueling day, and the 25th, tomorrow, will be a wind down day or a half day at most. But last Sunday we learned of the surprise arrival of the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in South Africa, and there were comments made about, are we now going to be roped into Russia's war? And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, BRICS is changing the world. South Africa is one of the first five, it is the fifth member, came in a year after, 1 year later than the four founding members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, but we're the fifth member, and there are more to come. There is no way that we are not neck deep in this thing. And by this thing, I mean this relationship. Which is not to say that we're going to be conscripted and sent to fight in the Ukraine, but it is to say, make no mistake where this thing is headed. On Monday morning, we awoke to the news that Eskom's former General Manager of System Operations, one Robbie van Heerden, gave a speech, I believe at Midstream Estate, over the weekend or early on Monday morning. I haven't looked hard enough to find out, but at about 11 o'clock on Monday it was reported that stage 8 load shedding was most likely. And I went on to tell people that this is absolutely unsustainable. I gave the illustration of the 25% decrease in the maize crop in this region that a farmer described to me. They did some tests, some assessments, they got the specialists in, and the average drop in the maize crop this year in one of the most richly irrigated maize growing areas in the whole of South Africa is 4 tons per hectare, which is 25%, and that is the average. Many are beneath that, as some are above. So that's a consequence of the load shedding that we've had. The stage 4, 5, and 6, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 5, 6 that we had through late November, December, and January. And we'll come back to that point in a second. So if we go to stage 8, we're going to be in a great deal of trouble. Then we learned that Monday morning that Joe Biden had arrived in Ukraine on a secretly planned visit in one of the most cynical, designed to provoke moves of modern political history. Absolutely unnecessary warmongering. But the whole affair turned into a farce a few hours later when it was revealed by, I believe, the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, that, in fact, the USA had asked their permission for the visit. Oh, dear me. The USA had said to the Russians, "Do you mind, please," and put it in writing. And so Joe Biden was permitted to visit Ukraine at the pleasure of Mother Russia. Tuesday, the 21st of February, we saw Vladimir Putin's annual State of the Nation type address. They don't call it State of the Nation, but his annual address to the Russian Federation. And really, I wouldn't say it was much ado about nothing, but he spent a lot of the time recapping on things that we really already knew, a lot of the time telling us how good it was going, and a lot of the time making promises for things to come in all sorts of regards. Allowances and tax breaks and civil engineering projects and you name it. However, at the end of the speech, he dropped one of the biggest bombshells of the past 35 years, when he announced that Russia was not withdrawing from the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that controls intercontinental nuclear ballistic missiles. Russia would not withdraw, but it would no longer comply, that it would no longer cooperate, that it would no longer collaborate as one with its chief partner, namely the USA, for the reasons that we all understand. It's a retaliation for the attack on Nord Streams 1 and 2, and for 100 other things that the USA has done to fan the flames of the war in Ukraine. But as if that wasn't enough, later that evening, Annika Larsen of ENCA interviewed Andre Derita, the Chief Executive Officer of Eskom, in a bombshell tell-all interview. When I say tell-all, he was discreet, he was tactful, he was reserved in some ways, but he did say many, many things that have never hitherto been said in public about what goes on at Eskom, about his attempted assassination, about the involvement of the African National Congress as the chief, as the capstone echelon in the hierarchy of theft, bribery, corruption, fraud, and so on at Eskom. It was a very powerful thing, and it has made waves like few other similar events that I can think of in my lifetime. I can't remember a CEO being in such circumstances as he was, and doing an interview that had such a powerful impact across South Africa over the next couple of days. The next day, Wednesday the 22nd of February, again on the theme of Eskom, we learned that Eskom is planning for Stage 9. Hitherto, the rosters and schedules for the stages didn't make allowance for anything above a Stage 8. It, so to speak, didn't exist as a possibility. Lo and behold, we discovered that Eskom is now incorporating a Stage 9 into its rosters. And as one, was it Beeld? I think it could have been Beeld. Media outlet said, effectively, hulle beplan vir fase 9. And I suppose that is true. I mentioned that we'd come back to Cyclone Freddy. Cyclone Freddy was hovering off the coast of Madagascar. Many people were concerned that it would smash Madagascar, go across the Mozambican Channel into Mozambique, do lots of harm there, and possibly drift slightly southward into the northern and western regions of South Africa, where it may do a hang of a lot of harm on soil that is already saturated by the recent rains. Well, it appears so far so good, as if it is not doing so. It looks as if it's going to drift across northern Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia, and that we will be given some respite from the deluges. Last but not least, for Wednesday the 22nd of February, Andre Derita was fired. The board convened a meeting the day after his bombshell interview was aired on ENCA, and his resignation was brought forward with immediate effect. It's tantamount to a firing. Clearly, his interview humiliated the African National Congress beyond any tolerability, and they had to get rid of him at once. And we now know that he is going into the buitenland, he's going abroad, and in his interview he made it clear that that was because of danger that he felt over his life. Thursday, the 23rd of February, yesterday, the three reports, that the first three that I'm going to mention here, to me are on the same theme. City Power cut the lights of Johannesburg's famous apartheid museum. I've actually been to it. It's a very self-righteous place, and very skewed. It has a very skewed message to tell. Then, miners trapped underground after power lines collapsed after cable theft. At one of the Sibanye mines, cable theft led to pylons collapsing. You know those pylons, often you see them when they've got a narrow base or just a point on which they balance. You wonder to yourself, how do they stay aloft? Why don't they topple over? And that, of course, is because they're in tension. They're kept in tension by the very power lines. And theft of the lines had led to the pylons collapsing, which in turn led to other lines that had not been stolen breaking, snapping, which led to a power supply to the mine being cut and miners being trapped underground. And then we saw for the first time, beloved Suidlanders, the first time ever, people in South Africa begin to cotton on to the fact that the Eskom's load shedding stages maths doesn't work. For months, Eskom has been telling a big lie about what stage of load shedding we're in. There is a schedule that you can work it out from. It's very, very easy. Stage 6, I've told you this before, is 36 hours over 4 days. That's 9 hours a day. It can be slightly more, slightly less, but it's 9, not 10 and a half, as we saw. And we started to see people really query it. Videos come out. I think the Center for Risk Analysis, or the Daily Friend by the Institute for Race Relations, did a video talking about that. I saw people querying it on social media. And finally, Eskom admitted that in fact we were in a stage that they hadn't acknowledged. So City Power the Apartheid Museum, miners trapped underground, and Eskom finally admitting that they'd been bulldusting us since forever, and that it is far, far worse than they were willing to admit. But now, of course, the poetic irony lies in the fact that people like the Apartheid Museum don't pay their power bills. K.W. Miller, that troublemaker, has done a duck. All of a sudden, he stopped producing videos. His One South Africa, or South Africa First website became inoperable. He terminated one of his social media profiles, and I believe that even his LinkedIn account was closed, something along those lines. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Troublemaker. The Rand, ladies and gentlemen, I've just been having a look at the state of the Rand to the dollar. It is very serious. Perhaps I can bring it up here. We are now at a point last seen in March of 2020, when the Rand went to about 9. Let me have a look here. Come on, man. It was briefly over 19 to the dollar. It's now at 18 Rand 44. Oh, dear me, it's just gone up by 4 cents in the past half an hour. The only other time that we've seen these heights, I've mentioned 1840 now, it was about 19 Rand and 14 cents in March of 2020, was at a point in time in October last year when it was briefly 18 Rand 14 cents to the dollar. And the troughs between those three peaks that I mentioned to you are very deep. In other words, previously, on the previous two occasions, it saw those heights, but then recovered quite a lot. Only time will tell whether we recover very much from this 18 Rand 44, but I can tell you that going back a long way, we haven't seen such dramatic increases. It's not looking good at all. And that began yesterday, and as I say, it's continuing today. Today is the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, of Russia's special military operation. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know what has happened. A year ago, in response to shelling that began on the 16th of February from Ukraine, very, very, very heavy shelling of the Russian-speaking, the ethnically Russian Donbass region, Donbass meaning Don River Coal Basin. The Don River is a river in Russia, and there's a flat steppe that runs each side of that river for a long way, all the way into Ukraine. And that Donbass region has got very good soil, good coal mining area, etc. So once that shelling began, Russia moved in. They had been preparing for a couple of years. They took their moment. They were meant to go in on the 22nd. Then there was a leak. The Americans were able to predict over a week in advance that Russia would be going in on Tuesday, the 22nd of February. Putin hesitated, and then he decided to take his chances. Since then, he has, for the most part, been able to take those two that fall in the Donbass, those two oblasts, think of them as provinces if you like, Luhansk, Donetsk. He's been able to take two more provinces for the greatest part, or to the greatest extent, in the south, and it looks as if he may really try to lay his hands on another couple too along the south coast. There's no point going into much more of this. We'd be here all day. It has been a year of high drama. Let it suffice to say that Russia has decidedly the upper hand in the conflict. This afternoon, we learned that South Africa has been grey-listed by an international anti-money laundering watchdog. This is big news, everybody, because it comes in combination with all of our other woes. So it by itself, if it had occurred during apartheid, let's say, when we were structurally speaking 100 times more strong and solid and stable, it would have been a knock, but it may not have been a contributing factor to a worsening. But it does seem as if this will contribute to a worsening of our financial and economic circumstances. We'll do a full video on that soon. And last but not least, one Khalib Qasim has been appointed as the interim CEO of Eskom. Eskom Chief Financial Officer Khalib Qasim has been appointed interim CEO following the abrupt departure of Andre Derita. He takes on the role with immediate effect until further notice, the power utility said in a statement on Friday. There's not much more to be said, is there? It's not looking good for Eskom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this. Friday, the 24th of February 2023, Suidlanders Week in Review. I wish you a blessed, really from my heart, may every Suidlander enjoy a blessed weekend this weekend. God bless all of you. Cheerio.